Do you have the gift of gab and like talking about interesting topics? Are you often called opinionated by your friends and family? Then come to Anchor where you can be all of the above and get paid for it. Along with being one of the easiest systems to create contact with, Anchor supplies everything you need and can be used from your smartphone or computer. They even distribute your content for you so that you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. Just download the Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. Hello, Out and Abouters. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib. It is November 19th, 2019 at 11:06 p.m. and this is my review for the movie Harriet. To give you a little bit of background, this movie was directed by Cassie Lemons, who also brought us Eve's Bayou, the Caveman's Valentine, and Talk to Me, the film with Don Cheadle, about the story of Petey Green. Eve's Bayou is also one of the movies where we met Jussie Smollett's sister, Journey, and all-star cast: Samuel L. Jackson, Lynn Whitfield, and Megan, I'm trying to remember her last name. Isn't that terrible? One of my favorite actresses, though, when she was younger. Feel like they all grew up on me. So this particular film is considered to be a biographical film. Cassie Lemons co-wrote it with Gregory Allen Howard, who is responsible for Remember the Titans. So it's the story of Harriet Tubman. The Harriet in question is Harriet Tubman. And as you all know, Harriet Tubman is a famous slave turned abolitionist. So to give you a little bit of background on Harriet, she was actually born Aramita Ross. She was born and died in the same month. I thought that was interesting. So she was born in March of 1822, and she passed away in March 10th, 1913. So she escaped slavery herself and made 13 trips to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people, including family and friends. So she did this using the network of anti-slavery activists known as the Underground Railroad. So many of you may, if you're listening to me and you're in Ohio, we were actually part of that. And I'll explain our part in that a little bit later, because we do have famous land sites that were a part of that. So she also helped John Brown, who was another abolitionist, recruit men for his raid on Harper's Ferry. So she was part of that. She served as an armed scout and spy for the Union Army during the American Civil War. And in her later years, she was an activist for women's suffrage, which, of course, was changing the laws to allow women to vote. So those who keep, feminists, blah, blah, blah. Well, Harriet also is, a woman of color also partook, as a black woman, if you say that had nothing to do with you, well, you're wrong. Harriet actually took part in the women's suffrage to be able to get us to vote. I think Sojourner Truth might have even been a part of that movement too. So, and if you want, I can provide that information to you a little bit later on. But right now, this is a movie review. So to give you a little bit of background on the Underground Railroad, it was formed in the 1700s, and it was a network of secret safe houses and routes in 19th century U.S. Used to help guide slaves to freedom. The northern states to the northern states, and then later to Canada after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was passed. There were other routes that led to Mexico where slavery was abolished. So it wasn't just the North. People also escaped to Mexico as well. This movement grew steadily until the Civil War began, and estimates suggest that by 1850, 100,000 slaves had escaped to freedom via the Underground Railroad. The actors in this movie were Cynthia Erivo, who played Harriet, Leslie Odom Jr., who played William Still, Joe Alwyn, who played Gideon Brooks, Janelle Monáe played Marie Buchanan, Jennifer Nettles of Sugarland fame played Eliza Brodus, Vanessa Bell Calloway played Rip Ross, who was Harriet's mother, Clark Peters played Ben Ross, Harriet's father, Henry Hunter played Walter, a slave tracker. I'm thinking he was the one young guy, because there was more than one slave tracker, in this movie. And Vondi Curtis Hall, who was Cassie Lemon's husband, played the Reverend Samuel Green. Now, as I go a little bit further, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on some of these people, because some of these people really existed. Reverend Green was a real person, and let me see here, William Steele was a real person. The Brodus family, there's still a little bit, the jury's still out on whether or not the parts of the Brodus family were actual people portrayed in the movie, because it does take some liberties. And Omar Dorsey played Bigger Long, who was also a slave tracker. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more about this character later, because he becomes if you've been on social media and you've heard people give commentaries about it, this particular character is under a bit of controversy. So William Steele, who Leslie Odom played, was based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and helped fugitive slaves and kept records of the people helped so he could reunite families. So basically, whenever people made it there, he would keep track of them, and if he could, he would reunite them with their families as more and more people began to escape to the north. Reverend Samuel Green was a Methodist preacher and farmer who purchased his own freedom in 1835, and he allowed Harriet to stay in his place during her rescue missions. Now, he aided in the escape of the Dover Eight. And this is, if you want to look up, if you just feel like, knocking yourself out, and I encourage you to knock yourself out on this one. The Dover Eight was a group of fugitives that was misled to the jail in Dover, Delaware. He was hoping to collect... The person who misled them was hoping to collect $3,000 for their capture. They wound up escaping and made their way to freedom anyway. And this was on the website Black Thin that I found this. Green himself was arrested and brought to trial, which he wound up being acquitted for possessing a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I found this on the National Park Service website, nps.gov. So more on the film. The release date for the film was September 10th, 2019 at the Toronto International Film Festival, and then it was released later on theatrically in the U.S. on November 1st, 2019. So the budget for the film was $17 million. As of today's date, the box office has been $26.5 million. So Harriet has netted a profit. Now, the reason why I give these figures is because, especially as black film goers, it is very important for us to support black film when we can. And people, since I have been a part of the Support Black Film, my own little unofficial movement, since probably the 90s when the hood movies were out, like New Jack City, Boys in the Hood, different ones, Ease by You, and different ones by black female filmmakers. And it's because, we don't see a whole lot of us because they don't think that, we make dollars. And we have steadily began to fool a lot of people. And a lot of the reasons why is because we're not supporting a whole lot of films, or simply because we're not seeing a whole lot of us. And now we're starting to make a little more demands on our people, which is good because we're now seeing more diverse types of us in film. It does as a bit of a nerd and a horror movie nerd. I'm glad to see more of us making horror movies. I'm glad to see more of us making science fiction. I'm even glad to see one of the things that I loved about the movie Get Out was that they're making racism into horror. I'm like, racism is horror, honey. It's a very scary thing when you think of some of the stuff that was able to be done to us. So we're representing. The movie was distributed by Focus Features, a division of art house in the art house film division of NBC Universal. So some points of controversy in this film: Bigger Long and the White Savior Complex, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, and Cynthia Erivo's being cast as Harriet. So I'm going to go into Cynthia Erivo first. Some of her background, many of y'all probably heard, more y'all probably heard of her than I have, but she played Celie in the Broadway revival of The Color Purple and won the Tony Award for Best Actress in 2016 in a musical. One of 9 recipients of 2017 to get a Grammy Award for Best Musical Theater Album. She also has been in Widows in 2018, Bad Times at the El Royale in 2018. So she was born to Nigerian parents in Stockwell, South London. Yeah. She attended University of East London and then I think transferred to Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. She wound up getting in there, so she went ahead and transferred. So there was some controversial tweets where they felt like she was making fun of black folks, which I will address at a later date. I don't really have a whole lot of time to go into it now. Samuel L. Jackson had some remarks about the entertainment industry's love for foreign blacks versus domestic African Americans. On that one, that's not really her fault, although I have to say, I can remember in the early days of MTV, there being a little bit of a thing because it seemed like the only black artists that used to get any play were foreign blacks in the early days. For some reason, like, they would play Grace Jones. They loved Grace Jones. They loved Joan Armatrading. They loved anybody but try to get some American blacks on there. I remember, I think it was Epic, because Michael Jackson was Epic at the time. They wouldn't even play Michael Jackson. They wouldn't play Michael Jackson until Epic threatened to pull some of their white artists. And so Samuel L. Jackson isn't completely wrong in his assessment. However, I personally didn't have a problem with her playing Harriet because she is a good actress. She's got acting chops. I just read her resume, so she is really good at what she does. She also is a very gifted singer. In fact, the song at the end of the movie is sung by her. And they have since, released a video of her singing the song on YouTube. So it is her song. It's also available on Spotify if you want to hear it. So she does have singing. So does have singing chops, and she does sing throughout the movie. And I will address, what causes her to sing. So, like I said, I don't really have any problem with her playing the part. I had to discuss the tweet thing later. Except to say that it sounds like she's friends with this blogger, and the blogger, said, like I said, there's some things that I'm gonna have to get into later, because I'm one of those people. I'm not really on the fence, but I'm sensitive, and being a sensitive person, I'm always sensitive to how we feel about something, because I understand our sensitivities. But I also understand if the person may not have meant to brush against those sensitivities. So anyway, the white savior controversy concerning the Bigger Long character. So Bigger Long in this movie was a bit of a bounty hunter. So I looked, because I was like, now bounty hunters, he was a slave tracker. At that time, he was considered to be a slave tracker. Slave trackers and bounty hunters were kind of interrelated terms. So I looked up, bounty hunters. If you want to do, your homework on bounty hunters and slave trackers, part of the thing is, according to Wikipedia, there was no known record of black slave trackers. However, everywhere else I looked that was black sites kind of supported the notion that there probably was. And the biggest motive would be money. The amount that they would pay them would allow them to live pretty well. So, it's basically like selling their soul to the devil, but it allowed them to live pretty well, just like anything else that would tempt certain ones to turn on us, unfortunately. So there was a scene in the movie Harriet. I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but what bothered me about calling in this scene, Harriet's former master, who called her his favorite slave or his pet, which I'm like, really? And you have to see the movie. He talked to her really bad. And so I'm like, if she was his favorite, I hate to hear how he talked to anyone that wasn't his favorite. But he, had commissioned the Bigger Long character, who was a big black man, my whole thing with that too. He commissioned this guy. He said, I want you to bring her back alive. And so Bigger was about to kill Harriet. And so the white slave master killed Bigger to keep him from killing Harriet. Now, the only problem with calling that white savior complex is white savior would have been if he would have allowed Harriet to go free. He wasn't going to let Harriet go free. He was about to try to drag Harriet back to that plantation. Okay, so there's no white savior complex there. And, this is kind of inspiring me to do another separate podcast on the whole, because I've heard a whole lot of, brothers are smart. So, when I say ignorant black men, I'm not calling all black men ignorant, because y'all are not ignorant. But sometimes I hear black men say, accuse black women of being race traitors and white savior over stuff that, like, really? If you would really repeat that sentence back to yourself on some of the stuff that you call us race traitors about, and call us, depending on the white man, all that. If you really thought about that, you would not say that. So I think that may be a topic for my Respectability Politics series. So anyway, back to the movie. So some of the themes that I saw here, spirituality is one theme. And I say spirituality because there was a lot of focus on Harriet's mission, because she felt called of God to come and rescue the rest of her family, and even and other, she felt like part of her mission was to come, and you hear it in the song that Cynthia Erivo sings, the theme song. She felt like, and if you've ever read up on Harriet Tubman at all, you know that she felt like her mission was to come and set her people free. In fact, she was called Black Moses. And the Black Moses thing, not really the insult that I think anybody thought it would be. One of the reasons they called her Black Moses, because they just knew it had to be a man coming back for all of us. They didn't think a woman was capable of doing this. How much male society and patriarchy underestimates women. Also, she had a prayer life. It was suggested that she had visions because she was knocked upside the head. But she had visions, and in these visions, she was given direction on how to proceed in their journey back in her journeys to the north, and in her journeys down to the south to rescue slaves. And many of these visions helped her to avoid slave trackers and avoid any of the slave trackers that were using dogs to hunt them down. And so many of their journeys had to go through water, because water throws off the scent of bloodhounds. The Underground Railroad was, a big theme. Which I gave you a little bit of background on that, which while she did not start the Underground Railroad, she was a very integral part of the Underground Railroad, in that she helped, free quite a few slaves. So she played a very big part in what they did. Slavery, of course. Slavery was probably the central theme. Another theme was the Fugitive Slave Act, because she was successful in saving a lot of slaves. And then once she was bringing them up north as far as Pennsylvania, I believe. And then once the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 passed, then their journey had to go even further, which was to Canada. So a little bit of background on the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. It passed in September 18th, 1850 by U.S. Congress. It was part of the Compromise of 1850. So the Compromise of 1850 was a package of 5 separate bills passed by Congress to diffuse a political confrontation between slave and free states on the status of territories acquired in the Mexican-American War. Because remember what I said earlier, Mexico was also part of the Underground Railroad, because people didn't just, those that were closer to Mexico fled to Mexico and got freedom there. So this also sets Texas's western and northern borders. It included provisions addressing this was, the law I just talked about, included provisions addressing fugitive slaves and the slave trade. This law was brokered by Whig Party Senator Henry Clay and Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas, and it was supported by President Millard Fillmore. So let me see here. The law, the Fugitive Slave Law, which was what the Fugitive Slave Law, which was a part of the compromise, required that all escaped slaves upon capture be returned to their master, and that official citizens had to cooperate. So abolitionists nicknamed this law the Bloodhound Law because bloodhounds were what they used to track slaves. This was actually the third such law requiring the northern states to give up slaves. This one had stiffer penalties for officials who didn't respond. There were, in the name of fines, they had stiffer fines for them. So now I'm going to get to my response on this film. So if you remember me on Dolomite, I said Dolomite and the Mr. Rogers movie with Tom Hanks. I kind of felt like we're going to be the feel-good films of 2019. I'm going to add this one as the third one. I'm giving this a first run rating. I believe it's worth your first run dollars to go and see it. One of the reasons being, I think it's important to not only go see it, but also take your children. You may even want to read up on Harriet Tubman before you take them. You also might want to remind them that when not to take everything in this film literal, because or you may want to read up and talk about slavery and talk about Harriet afterwards, simply because, and discuss with them and let them know the realities of the film industry, how sometimes they take creative license in order to tell a story. So not to believe everything that they said, not to take everything in this film literally. How certain characters, like the character, there's certain characters I don't want to give away. I like to give you reviews without giving away too many spoilers. So I'm going to say that this would probably be the third feel-good movie. When the movie was done, everyone applauded. The entire theater broke out in applause after the movie was done. So that's just how invested in this movie we got. It was very captivating, very engaging. Not a boring, not a slow part to it, not any no slow spots, very engaging. When it was done, you wanted Harriet to save the slaves. You got a real good picture. This is, you have a lot of people who say, I don't have any problem with Hollywood making slave films. And I don't have a problem with them because I think keeping up with where we learn certain behavior from, doing our history, when there's a saying about not knowing your history and being doomed to repeat those mistakes. And I kind of believe that's true. If you don't know your history, if you don't know where certain practices come from, if you don't know, I remember, Kanye West's controversial remarks. And it's like, if you do a thorough study on slavery was not a choice. It was not a choice. And there were many efforts to try to escape slavery. We saw the Nat Turner rebellion. There was the Amistad situation, and Debbie Allen. I really highly recommend seeing that one too. If you have a chance to see it on Netflix or one of these other streaming services, I highly recommend that you watch Amistad. If you really want to just make an evening and binge watch movies about, and study the different ones. I think there was also Harper's Ferry that we're talking about right here. I think had something to do with that. There were many rebellions and insurrections. I think Amistad had to do with them suing for their right to return to Africa or return to where they came from, to keep from being, so there were many fights. But you also have to realize one thing, you have to do your analysis properly. They didn't have the gunpowder that many of the masters had, But, I mean, if they would have had access to any of the weapons that any of these people had, there's, ain't no telling what could have happened, what we could have done, and what the history books would have had to say. But, we've always fought the good fight. So never let anybody think that don't ever let anybody get inside your head with that type of thing and make you think, well, we just were slaves because we didn't fight hard enough. We fought the whole time. So those were many things I liked about the film. I liked that they included God. I liked the fact that they included her relationship to God and how she felt called or commissioned. I liked how they included one thing. I talked about her singing voice, Cynthia Erivo's singing voice. So one of the things I liked was how they talked about where the origin of the Negro spiritual. So many people, don't realize, or you haven't read it, but Negro spirituals had their roots not just in slavery, but they also were people. They also had to do with people speaking in code. So many times those spirituals were a way of letting people know, where we could meet so that we could try to escape, or letting us know where to meet, or letting us know when something was going down, such as lynchings or night ridings or anything. So we've always had a way of being able to communicate with each other through code, and that's included in this movie. You can see where she's talking to her parents. She lets them know, through song when she's back. She lets them know, they have to, meet in secret and different things like that. And so that was, part of our legacy. We weren't making up songs because, we just needed to pass the time of day and this whole slavery thing. No, they made up songs because it was their way of communicating with one another, especially when they were communicating plans on being able to escape. I like the fact that they showed, this is the second film that showed the role of the black preacher. And how the black preacher, even though they had freedom, they had a certain amount of freedom because they went from, different other plantations to preach, and they preach what, they're preaching, they're kind of Uncle Thomas. You got Christianity because of blah, blah, blah. Many of those preachers were hiding people who, the person of Samuel Green, they were hiding, I remember that one scene in this movie where one of the characters says, I don't know if I trust that preacher Green, because he teaches that we're supposed to do blah, 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 blah. And they got the preacher Green's house, and, there in his basement, he's hiding some slaves. So she wound up picking up some more people to take with her on this particular trip. So when you hear young people, talking about Christianity and its origins for the black person, you have to hear the whole story. You have to hear all of it. The preacher was not just there to, on the outside in front of the master, he might have been preaching one message, but underneath the scenes, they were also integral in helping a lot of slaves escape to the north in order to get off the plantation. So you have to do your homework and hear the whole entire story. Anyway, like I said, as you can hear, I highly recommend this movie. I think you should go see it. I think you should take your children to go see it. I definitely believe you should take your black girls to see it. Okay? I think young black women need, those examples of someone who did something to empower our people, that did something to empower other women. I would even love to see another movie, detailing her involvement in the women's suffrage, details. I want details of how she was helping women. I love how, that I would say this is probably only my problem with the Harriet Tubman narrative, is you only hear about how she's helped black people, which is very important. don't get me wrong, incredibly important. But I want to hear a little bit more about her involvement in women's suffrage. I don't think there's enough. Discussion on her, Sojourner Truth, and different people and different Black involvement in the ability to empower women in this nation as well, and especially Black women. Anyway, now that I've gone all of there, I'm gonna. So, like I said, as you can hear, I definitely am giving this movie my stamp of approval. This week I will be podcasting some more this week. I plan on trying to get a podcast a day up, and a video up, because this is going to go straight to podcast, and then I'm going to be going from podcast to video, and then from video to blog. And this week, this Friday night, of course, there will be eclectic weekends. I plan on doing this weekend. I want to do reggae. Last weekend I did jazz, so this weekend the theme is going to be reggae. And after that will be to be announced. Bookworm is going to be hosting another blog book tour, but it's going to be in January. Let me see here. I will have the details of that up on the Out and About blog so that you can see. Anyway, you guys, it's Tuesday, so by the time this is podcasted and up and everything, it'll be Wednesday. So you guys enjoy your week, and you'll be hearing from me some more this week. Anyway, be blessed and have a good one. Hello, you have reached the message line for Adam's Rib Media Ministry. If you would like to give me a shout out, recommend some topics for discussion, or give an opinion about some topics that I've already discussed, either here on my podcast or on my blogs, leave me a message and I will get right back to you. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.